So the first question is, what is the biggest challenge for D&I today? So feel free to write everything that comes to your mind regarding this question. So be careful, because if you validate before, adding, you need to add all the responses at once, because if
you have more than one, otherwise it skips to the
that's what I've done actually. Maybe we can add some options as well if you need to. Orally, if you want to discuss what you have in mind regarding the main challenge for D&I today. Of course, the D&I is not the same, the challenges are not the same in Europe, in the US, in Southeast Asia, or the other places in the world, but we try maybe to consider what are the challenges in Europe, for example. Raise awareness for sure.
So for those who just arrived, if you could go on to menti.com, and at the top of the screen you should see the number 99250628, which is the password that you would be asked, so that you can answer the questions that we have as a means of introduction. So what is the biggest challenge for D&I today is the question. So we've got the issue of awareness for some, and this is an interesting point. Brigitte and I, in recent months, were doing a presentation to the conference board to a group of directors of innovation. And we were very, very intrigued by the degree of sophistication of awareness of what diversity even meant in the organizations. Some would limit themselves to gender equity. Some were really, really way forward and already talking about neurodiversity, acquired diversity, or much, gender orientation, gender identity orientation, or sexual orientation. So it really varies tremendously. So raising awareness is definitely something that we still have to do and continue to do, very much so. Also to make people understand what's the difference between diversity itself, but also the need for inclusion to make the most out of diversity. The D&I fatigue is something that when we discuss to our D&I colleagues, some of our clients are raising that issue. And they're saying, well, there's been a sort of post-COVID George Floyd big wave with a lot of communication, some activism that got some people worried and scared, and which might lead to the third point of the acceptance. What do we think about D&I, and how are some people not wanting to even talk about it? I had in recent months an interview with a British CEO who openly talked to his staff, worried to talk to me because he knew I was going to talk to him about D&I, and he was absolutely convinced that I was going to be, and he used rather rude terms with his colleagues in terms of who I might be. And it was interesting because I had to have a long conversation with him so that he understood then that we were all about performance, about reputation, and that's what our core of our business was. And but the bias towards people like us was complicated.
We've heard also, Vanessa, regarding one of the challenge on D&I, as we discuss sometimes with D&I directors, is to try to find concrete tools to share with employees. Of course, most of them agree with the topic, but what they need is to have in their hands some concrete actions that they could implement as a manager, for example, with their team members. So,
absolutely. So
it is not knowing how to do it.
Yeah.
That makes it difficult and gets fatigue. You know, I don't have the time to search. I have other issues. How do I do this? You know, and the acceptance is partly you can accept it mentally, but then not know practically how actually do it with the people around you.
So the second question is, what makes you skeptic about D&I in your organization? Too extreme, no time, lack of authenticity, white male leaders, lack of skills. It's the no time is a very interesting point that we were having actually yesterday with one leader. I was talking to the Ministry of Defense recently, and that's one organization where you cannot hire from outside. Basically, you groom people to be military from the beginning and to grow in the respective roles of becoming ultimately generals. And the big issue there is that because you can't get people from the outside, you need to groom from the very beginning. And so they know that it's going to take them 20 years to 25 years to potentially reach a better equity balance between male and female. And in some organizations, there is a pressure and maybe a shorter term view that makes those things become almost impossible. The lack of genuineness is an interesting one. And I'll be saying a few words just after this on a book that was recently published that really touches upon that. Too extreme. That's another interesting one. Some leaders that we speak to are scared of the D&I topic. And even myself as an expert, when I feel a very different degree of psychological safety when I do cultural intelligence alone, because nobody could ever discuss the better or worth of any culture compared to another. Whereas when I discuss D&I, then there's judgment that gets involved. And there's a moment where you might be feeling vulnerable that maybe a point of view that you have is not shared by somebody else. And so the tensions in the debates, and this is something we'll cover as well when it comes to skepticism, are important ones for us to tackle in the first place. If anybody wants to say a few words about what they wrote, more than happy to listen to you. And then the last question.
So the last question I'd like you to answer in the Menti is, what is for you personally your biggest challenge in making D&I a success? Or in dealing with D&I issues, you personally?
Hi, hello everyone.
everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Vanessa. Hi, Emily.
Hello, hello.
So good to see you.
How are you? We are on menti.com if you want to answer the questions. And you go to www.menti.com.
And you've got
MENTI? Menti?
MENTI.com.
Like what you see on the screen, if you can see.
Yeah, Mentimeter.
And you've got the code 99250628.
Ah, okay.
You need to type menti.com, not Mentimeter. The impact Brigitte, is an interesting one that we were discussing the other day as well, in terms of like performance is what leaders want, and we know performance is there. Changing an individual's behavior is not something that you can quantify immediately, addressing the bottom line. And so some of us also discuss about reputation, because that's a lot quicker to build and to destroy. And so the arguments to convince skeptics is going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, the person who wrote Convince Skeptics, can we know a little bit more, if you're willing to share, what are the kind of issues you come across when you wrote this summary of Convincing Skeptics? What are you dealing with? Which is also colleagues buy-in, which is the flip side of so if the person who wrote colleagues buy-in, would like to add some additional perspective in words, so don't forget to unmute when you do that.
Sorry,
I am the one who actually wrote the colleagues buy-in, because this is something I'm experiencing in my daily work when talking about D&I. Like, my colleagues want to take part and take action in it, but then when it comes concrete, then there's no one else willing to participate. So yeah, I'm struggling to have like more than yes, D&I is important, to have real action from my colleagues.
Okay, that's a very, very interesting one, and it's a very common issue that we come across in organizations, where they may already have the mindset of, yes, let's do something. They may be convinced. Some are not even convinced, so you need to work on their mindset, because if the mind is not there, then there will be no action. But then once there's the mind, they need to get the skills and the ability to do it, and the information that enables them to turn it from a belief into actually actions that then will get results. Like Vanessa was saying, to have an impact, to have results, is what everybody wants to look for. But there are a few steps, before that. It is, what do I think? What do I do? And therefore, what are the results that I will get? And once you start getting results, everything reinforces itself. But it is a very, very, very important issue that you're coming across here. So this whole idea of, this large group of people, because you can't do this on your own, that you can use in the organization, to progress these issues, having individually, that is usually your biggest challenge. How do I enroll all of these other ones? How do I first identify? Because it's politically not correct, to say that I'm, yes, I believe into it, but I don't know how to do it, sometimes hides an issue of mindset. And so Vanessa, you wanted to share a few things.
I just wanted to, yes, and on this one as well, we see across organization a massive difference between those that invest and those that want it to be pro bono discussion. And so we've got entire groups of D&I responsibles that are either full-time employees on that topic, or we've got marketing directors, HR directors, etc., that take as a willingness, without being paid any extra money, that responsibility. And that changes tremendously of course, the linearity of the bandwidth they have, and how much they can deliver, you know? And so that also shows what is going on in organizations, and the degree of sophistication that we were talking about also appears in the organizational charts. So I wanted to say a few words about, and particularly somebody wrote about the lack of authenticity. And there's a book that was just published recently by a French journalist from Le Figaro called Anne de Guigné, and it's called The Woke Capitalism, Le Capitalisme Woke. And I just wanted to say a few words about that book, because she shows how historically organizations, companies have taken a bigger role in society. And for having worked in sociology of organizations, it's true that big corporations or smaller corporations all play a role in the evolution of society through what they do. And so think about the 19th century and the big family businesses, the Cadburys of this world, the Michelins of this world, even the Peugeots of this world, that in Europe and possibly beyond created the first health system, created the first housing system for their employees, and really had a tremendous effect in what we call social services that were then taken on by governments, and today are supposed to be the responsibility of governments. And what Anne de Guigné points out, and we met Amélie and I with her recently, she has no she just wanted, the objective of her book is to raise awareness to a phenomenon and to have leaders think about what their responsibility ought to be. And basically what she shows is that with the size of organizations growing exponentially in some cases, and with some problems around the world, including environment and some societal issues happening, not being able to be tackled by governments or institutions per se alone, that the organizations are more and more taking on an additional role. And so the issue there, and so that's why I wanted to put it in the mini skepticism that she brings, is when there's a lack of authenticity of a company tackling an immediate reaction from George Floyd by doing something about, I don't know, skin color, if they are a beauty product, or someone, you know, boycotting some events because of, etc. But then internally not following through. And so one of the things that we are really seeing more and more, and we're gathering examples around us, is companies that fall flat by lack of authenticity, and that misunderstand marketing and communication to be a mosaic of colors. You know, it's like Benetton, every ad becomes a Benetton ad, the caricature of the Benetton ad, rather than in truly, and this is work that we're doing also with Brigitte, with Includers, with really tackling inclusion at every stage of every process, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to communication, when it comes to marketing, and realizing that the ultimate result might not be a multicolored photograph, but what is important is that the consumers that have been questioned, that the people who are analyzing the data, that the people are making decisions upon the analysis of the data, that everywhere there's been psychological safety to be able to add the inclusion part and the importance of the inclusion part. And this is something that's a message that we are trying to make people understand more and more, because otherwise you fall really into the caricature of thinking that diversity and inclusion is a multifaceted sitcom where everybody needs to belong. And well, it might, but it might not, is what we're saying. And if the process leads to that result, fair enough. If the process leads to a completely different result, that's fair enough as well. And what is important is to grow your business in an authentic, responsible, and inclusive manner. Any questions or reactions on this? We have one. You can also write on the chat if you prefer.
What was
Okay.
interesting, Vanessa, is the discussion we had last week as well with someone working on environment, you know, and all the challenges for companies regarding environment are really global, and people feel really involved in those strategies. Regarding D&I, sometimes we consider it's more individual, and it's, as Vanessa just said, we need to include diversity in inclusions in every steps of the process in the company. Marketing, communications, purchasing, and all those different departments. And I think that makes the main difference between both future challenges for all of us, all around the world. You know, we need to work on the environment and on diversity and inclusion as well.
And finally, maybe building upon your point, we also see, according to the degree, the needs of the business, those that are naturally inclined to go towards some societal issues.
Yeah.
So if we think about services like Sodexo, like Narian that we spoke to recently, and Sodexo as well, that are into services like cooking, cleaning, etc., and therefore they touch the lower portion of the social class, they are a lot more open-minded and conscious and concerned about questions like decent salaries, like bringing people close to their workplace, and trying to adjust so that the discrepancies in social and economic status are reduced in their organization. Those are not as sexy topics as those that we can then see applied in the luxury business, for instance, where it's going to be all about a certain number of other minorities, and where sexual orientation is going to be much more of a topic, for instance, and much more thought about and discussed. So it's interesting to see how and when organizations are willing to talk about certain topics, and which ones are the ones that people are super eager to flag because they are people want to hear about it. There's a sort of sexiness about the topic, and other topics that others are like putting below, but it's still super important. So now we have I would like to invite Brigitte, and I'll say a few words about Brigitte because I forgot to do it earlier. Brigitte has spent 30 years running global brands at Procter & Gamble, and she has had roles of personal advisors to the global CEOs on those brands that you all know, such as Gillette, Ariel, Febreze, and many others. And through that experience, she witnessed inclusive leadership or less inclusive leadership. And she's got a big experience of being the only woman in a world of men in many instances, but also other aspects of diversity. And she's passionate about unlocking the potential of the leaders, but also of their businesses through the power of inclusion. And so today, she's going to talk to us a little bit, and I'll dip in as well, on 4 simple steps to tackle skeptic leaders. Brigitte, the floor is yours. You might be on mute.
Yeah, I think you're on
Yes, I am. So now I'm unmuted. Okay, so yes, thank you, Vanessa. I have been forever passionate about ideas and people. So I am call me, you know, naive or so, but I've always believed that all of the solutions for all of the world's planet issues are within the minds and the hearts of a lot of the people, you know, that are living on this planet, but that the issue is that they're not coming out. And inclusion and diversity is one of the issues. If you, let's make a big cliche, if you don't listen to the women, you miss half of the ideas that are available then in the world. So I've always been about removing these kind of obstacles in my previous job, also into listening to people. What I'd like to share with you today is a little model that is about, you know, when I face somebody, you know, that is a resistor, you know, how do I deal with this? And there will be 4 elements to that. One is you first have to identify them. Then you have to deal with the emotions you have versus the situation of that person. You're better off if you're not on your own, and role others will be key. And the and addressing it directly is crucial also. So that's how I came up to ID as one of my passions. So I'd love to get from the floor from all of you, you know, what are some of your ideas on or experiences into how you identify somebody that is resisting to it? Don't forget to unmute if you start speaking. And there's no mentee, so this is free flow speaking.
Okay.
You can do it
no
on the
mentee,
chat as
no
well.
chat, so go ahead.
Chat you can use if you want.
Nobody?
I'll say one or two. There's 1 or 2 things that come to mind immediately, which is people that say, "Oh no, it's certainly not my priority," and you don't know whether that person believes in it or is hiding behind another emergency.
That's a very interesting one, Vanessa, because one of the things with resistors is if they're very vocal, if they speak, it's actually easy. You know what you deal with if they're against it in no uncertain terms, you know, if they do that. What is interesting, and I see, Viri, you've just written something very interesting on this one also, is how do you identify the mindset? Is you have to really look at how they behave and their actions. If they seem scared, if they say yes, but, the famous yes, but, you know, I may be losing something, or, but it's very often a matter of, you know, observing the behaviors. And that is really crucial, because very often, certainly in the new world of what is politically correct, what you are allowed to say and not, all of the trainings they've had and on what you are allowed to say to somebody or not, everybody is walking on eggs, you know, very carefully in this field, because everybody feels it's a minefield. So really getting to identify who resists versus the people who are really into it, you can only see it from how they behave and how they act. And when you do that, when you identify one of these people, you know, you really have to pause and think, you know, and we'll get to that in a minute also, what are my feelings? But also, what am I thinking? And what you need to do is really to go and be curious, to understand what they're thinking and feeling, because they may give you information that are absolutely crucial to be able to get more people around the to join, you know, this big mission of better inclusion and better diversity. And for that, you have to really have the desire to learn about, you know, what they're thinking and feeling. And that's key, you know, and it is one of the tricks I like to think about is, you know, fall in love with the questions you have rather than with the answers you have for the resistors. We think a lot about, you know, convincing. So that is about us having answers and pushing them down to the resistors. But it is, what are the questions that I'm going to be asking to find out whether the person I have in front of me is really a resistor, or not, and why are they feeling this way? And therefore you have to have some empathy also for them to be able to understand, you know, their experience, their feeling, their emotions. But it is key to take this efforts to put yourself in their shoes, and then, you know, when they talk to you, is to distinguish really, you know, what is a fact they're giving to you, or what is a feeling that they just have in general. I'm scared to lose my job, so this is women are more competition. You know, in the past we only had men to deal with, which we understand, and now I'm in competition with for the big job with a woman. So you have to be able, if you're on this call, you're probably very, you know, interested in this subject and very open. Your mindset is already there, but you know, if you find resistors, they're not there. And therefore, the next thing, and I'd love, you know, Vanessa and Amelie to build on that one, is to deal with your own emotions. You need to take. So Amelie, go ahead.
Yes, before we start these sections regarding the previous one, maybe I'd like to add. The thing we often hear is sometimes people, when we talk about diversity, especially, for example, in France, we talk about LGBT. This is the first word that came to people's mind, and women and men and handicap. What I try to do when I face, you know, reticence is just to show and to describe diversity, the spectrum of diversity. And for example, we talk a lot with Vanessa about neurodiversity. And last week, I talked to one of my friends who's managing a big department in a huge company. And it was like, you know, you've got a son who's dyslexic, and this is part of diversity as well. So I like what you've just said, Brigitte, when you say we need to be curious and ask them some question. The question could be, what do you how would you describe the spectrum of diversity, you know, in your company? It's not only gender, it's not only LGBT, it's more than that. And people sometimes, when they realize that, you know, maybe change their mind. It's what I've experienced quite a lot over the last.
Building on what you're saying.
And one of the one second, I'll build on what Amelie said. One that very often speaks when I give, you know, bias and diversity training and inclusion trainings. One of the ones that people that clicks in their mind is when you say "and between departments." You know, the finance department is this type. You know, the marketing department does always this, and the production department is always this. You know, they have some biases against, and therefore a marketeer will not listen to an idea that may be a good idea from a finance person because, oh, they should take care of finance. That is one of the ones that they very often miss also. Yes, Vanessa, sorry.
Exactly to that point. And what I like, and what we're isolating into different buckets, is all the insights behind that resistance. And sometimes it's also useful to listen to how they talk. One of the big resistance we had recently was a senior female executive. And she's like, listen, we're 50-50 male and female, and I'm sick and tired of being mixed with the LGBTs, with whatever it is that there is, other types of minorities who are people who are not 50% of the population, because she felt that she was more entitled to it. And she kept talking about the domination of men towards female, etc. And so even in the words that she was using, you could see that she was actually using terms that philosophically or politically relate to groups of individuals against each other. And one of the things that we helped her debunk was, this is about our differences. As you were saying, Brigitte, sometimes it's super good for people, even a white male, to realize that he's been excluded once because he was a dad or he wasn't a dad, or because he was too short or too tall, or introvert or extrovert, to really take out the labels and the taboos of some of the labels that are amongst the minority groups, so that people start engaging in the conversation. So, okay, we can talk about it amongst ourselves. We don't need, because we're all involved. And that's, so I think that's a very good point. Yeah.
And the other one that works, because somebody wrote, you know, the white male and so on. What works with them also is to reverse the questions. Were
Yes.
there moments where, because of who you are, you were favored?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so not only the negative, but you got an advantage because you
Yeah.
were, you know, whatever, the same golf club than the boss, so whatever it could be, or I also was a parent, or also, so turn it around, because that's another way of looking at, you know, diversity and inclusion is what, not only who do I discriminate, but who do I favor?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to the second point, dealing with our emotions.
So any suggestions? Does anyone already have the?
Did you face a resistor and did
Yeah.
you get mad, or did you get frustrated or discouraged or anything? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I can share my own experience. So me, for instance, I'm working in the beer industry. And when talking about D&I, we not just realized, but yeah, we realized that the priorities that we have in the offices, for instance, aren't the same in breweries. So for instance, we were organizing a lot of D&I initiatives, talking about, yeah, gender parity, LGBTQ plus and so on. And I got some feedback from breweries that it wasn't a priority, it wasn't good enough, we weren't doing any D&I initiatives. So at first I was quite frustrated because I spent a lot of time and energy on this. But then what we decided to do is maybe pause for a moment and sit with them and discuss, just organize this listening session. And we ask them, okay, so when we talk about D&I, diversity, what does it mean to you? And then we realized that what they really want to see, it's age diversity, it's education diversity. And it's not LGBTQ plus and so on, because we're already doing a lot on this. So at first, yeah, a lot of frustration. But then when you, spend time trying to understand what it means, like it's, you're cracking the nut here. And then we improve our D&I index.
I think the other thing that you did by accepting to put yourself in a listening mode, is that you didn't shut yourself up to a reaction that you could have thought was cynical, skeptical, and not engaging on D&I. And it wasn't. And that's what is super important when we talk about the identification of resistors, is to make sure we understand the why behind. That's what when we talk, some of us are marketeers and consumer gurus, and we really like to understand the why, the insight behind the behavior, you know, and behind the comment. And so that's what is super important. So it's nice that you did that. And indeed, the pausing is going to be a very, very important one, and the clarification. Because
Inclusivity, you know, as Apolline just said, you know, make a pause and ask questions to understand, you know, their feelings and their frustration maybe as well. I think
one of the things that we encourage people to do as well, if somebody says something and or does something that you really are against, so imagine that it's about resistance to D&I and you're super convinced that it's important, to put a different label on that person, to imagine suddenly that they are the head of diversity and inclusion and that they said what they said. And you will have to think about them in a completely different way, because you will think that for sure they are in goodwill. And funny enough, in many, many instances, people are in goodwill. They just have a barrier that is unbearable for them and that you can help them overcross. So that notion of give them the benefit of the doubt and imagine that their D&I leaders actually would be a little bit of advice on how to look at them differently and not to be angry at them, but curious and engage in the dialogue. Sometimes
that is crucial. Yeah,
go ahead.
That is really crucial, because very often we judge the others on their action while we judge ourselves on our own intention. So going and understanding what is the intention they have, because sometimes they have good intention, but what comes out in their mouths is, something that comes out because they're clumsy and we don't have enough tools in this area. It's like a new language we're learning. Your pronunciation may not be perfect and you may say very strange things. So really having the time to pause, to clear your mind and be totally open and not judgmental, to really try to understand, and their curiosity is very important. It is crucial. Let's not, discriminate the people who are against it and therefore fail to understand them and fail to have their ideas. So, but you can only do that if you deal with your own emotions, because they're overwhelming you at the moment you get something in your face, and I've gotten a lot over the years. You have to really, really, really take a deep breath and say, okay, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to not feel aggressed by this. I'm going to try to find out what their intention was behind what they've just said or what they've just done.
And also because our passions become hot buttons. When we are passionate about certain topics, if we have the impression, the worst that could happen to us is that people might criticize our passions. And so sometimes we're so passionate that we hear people criticize when they're not. But that's how we hear it, because that's our biggest fear. So we need to manage ourselves and our emotions to make sure, and this is true for phenomena such as when you witness microaggression, for instance, you need to figure out whether that microaggression was voluntary, accidental, deliberate, or whether it was a sort of brushing off. No, that's not important anyway. And so, and when it comes to, for instance, the skepticism of a group versus another group, imagine you belong to a group that you consider to be either a minority or stakeholder group, and you want them to be recognized, and somebody else tells you, no, that's not as important as this other group. Who's to say who's more important, me or you, right? So there's an identity crisis there. So it's very important then to look at the commonalities of what all those people have in common. And one of them is to not be able to behave to their full potential in an environment because they're not feeling included and heard as much as others. And so this is also how we need to deal with our own emotions, is to take off some of the labels, to look at what we have in common versus what is differentiating us, and taking perspective and giving the benefit of the doubt. In interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next section, if that's okay.
Yes, perfect. I'll take that on. One of the things that can help you deal with your emotions without confronting somebody else is to enroll others. So you have a place where you can coach and talk with people who have had similar experiences with that individual or with that particular issue. Enrolling others works really, really well when you identify something that impacts other people. So identify people that are impacted by the same issue, by the same resistor, by the same process, because they can act then with you in understanding better the information, understanding better the point of view of the other person, because you still have all of your emotions. They've been dealing with their emotions, and you can get to a more factual approach versus the resistor if you commit to have a regular conversations with others that are impacted by the same issue. And that there's where telling you stories helps you really, your story to the people that are around you really help everybody understand your context and your perspective. So some companies have some networks around this. I've been leading a few networks within Procter & Gamble, where I've worked for 30 years on, women supporting women in those days, which was a group of women who were trying to progress the issue. I was also in a direct group. Any of you have any experience with, enrolling others or organizing networks, positives or negative ones?
I have it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Let me know if I speak too much. Huh?
No way. Please.
No, but yes, this is what we're doing also in the company. So what we put in place lately is some ERG, so employee resource group. And the idea is for every employees, wherever they work, actually, you know, and any departments, any countries can join regarding the topic they want to work on. And so for the moment, we do not have a lot of participation because we have like 20 members by ERGs, having in mind, sorry, that the scope is about 3,000 people. So, you know, the comparison is not that big. But yeah, people join the group they want to work on, and we are trying to find new ambassadors. But thanks to our listening session, actually, we chose the big topics on which we want to focus, and it's easier to recruit and enroll new colleagues when you are targeting what they want to see and hear.
And here I'm going to throw
an excellent idea, you know, that's really superb, you know, is to search out, listen, you know, what are all of the issues, and then create groups on the basis of, you know, what are the topics that are hot or that are the biggest issues.
And I'm going to throw, building on this, an additional thought that could be controversial. And that's what we like also in inclusion and diversity, is the controversy. I don't know if you've seen in recent days some debates, and I'll do a mini analogy, in Hollywood about who is entitled to play a specific character. But there is a trend of actors that believe that in order to play a given role, you need to be that person in the first place. So if you want to play an LGBT, you should be homosexual. If you want to play a handicap, you should be, etc. And there's some people that also believe that in order to promote some messages, you need to have the person who is the embodiment of that minority, of that question, to be the spokesperson. And this is where my controversial insight comes in. And what if it wasn't? What if your best advocate in your company was somebody who was everything but that, however, convinced and passionate and willing to be heard by some people who can't hear from people who are too different from them? And so I think it's very important that we bridge communications at times to try to figure out who's the right casting to discuss certain topics. And of course, we're not going to end up with a homogeneous casting, because people would only want to hear from the white male 50 plus, etc. That being said, there are moments where that gentleman might be very, very useful to at least engage in the debate with the most skepticals. This is just a thought, and happy to hear reactions on this.
Vanessa, I'm going to share one experience that I had running a workshop with a leadership team of all male, white, in a big bank, in European bank in France. And what I found the most interesting in there was when they were all resistors. They started the session by saying, you know, we're going to learn how to speak to women. And when they started talking among themselves of the things where they felt discriminated, for instance, you know, there were nationality issues, and there were age issues also, where they felt discriminated. What was interesting about that is that people having lived similar experiences had a conversion effect among themselves. They said, oh yeah, you know, I had that experience too. And now that you tell me this, you know, I see how I could have gotten out of the situation by using some of the things that you did. So and that's also a bit what, you know, if you talk religions or so are using, you know, you use converts, people who come from not believing into it to believing into it, you know, teaching others, you know, and explaining them about all of their doubts and how they finally came to this point of view. So I think it's not an either or in the sense of inclusion. I think it's both. We should be able to use both.
And it's bridging, because experience of exclusion from an LGBT or from a white male that was, for some reason, because he was not married, for instance, excluded from a circle. I'm not talking about the degrees of severeness of some cases or others, but there's a moment where you can bridge the moment of exclusion and make people realize how unpleasant it was, whoever you might have been. And then that white male that could be considered as the majority and the non-vulnerable might be able to become into a promoter because he gets it, because there's a similarity of experience, not of the type of difference, but of the consequence of the exclusion for them. I don't know if that's,
and
that's clear.
it needs to feel very personal, so for the individuals, for them to have gone through the personal experience. So it only works if you start thinking, when was I discriminated? When was I favored because of, and you make a whole list of your characteristics, I'm white, I'm male, I'm married, I'm not, you make a whole list. My age is so much, and then you make that list and then put a cross against it, this is, because of this, I was discriminated. Because of this, I was favored. Then you suddenly have a totally different experience in it. And then you can groups, but enrolling others is usually when you are in as a group that shares the same issue. Can in interest of
to the
time,
last
Vanessa?
point.
Yeah. So I want you to address it directly. I put directly and not immediately, because obviously you first have to identify the resistors, you have to deal with your own emotions, you have to enroll others, then you can address it directly. What I mean here is speaking up, and speaking up in two ways. One is, to tell your own stories and share the experiences that could be appropriate. The other one is have respect for the other person, so don't make it accusatory, but really try. Most people don't intend to be biased or non-diverse, let's assume for 1 minute there is positive intent, you respecting what they've done and the different ways of them thinking, you need to confront it and have the courage to speak up, because it needs to be addressed directly. And each of us have different personalities, have different ways of explaining it, which is the richness of diversity. But each of us will have some stories and will have a way to do it. But we need to get in the mindset that, let's assume that, they don't do it on purpose, or so there was something that impeded them from expressing their positive intent. But really deal with it. It is important. And when you have a network and you enroll other people, you have more courage to speak up.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
We don't need to do what we often say with Vanessa, with our clients, is we don't want an approach on D&I where people feel guilty. We all accidentally exclude every day. So what we need to do is to deliberate, include. But some approach, and we've seen that sometimes in the US, that they consider, but people consider, they feel guilty because they, over the last 20 years, they were not inclusive enough. But, it's a journey, and we need to take the train when we're ready to take the train. So, yes, this is, I think, something really important.
So this kind of step-by-step approach to skepticism is something that we also offer in our training. So if you ever hear anybody with that need in their organization, feel free to pass along as well. Anybody would like to have a word for the conclusion? We've got 2 minutes left. Any burning question or any... Was it useful? Did you hear anything that was a bit different from what you were used to?
You can also put it in the chat if you prefer.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll meet again in a month's time, we will be sending you the theme 1 or 2 weeks before that. And one of the things that we are including more and more is mini summaries or comments on books that were recently released, because those are things that you might not have heard of yet. And the one thing that I forgot to mention is a new law that started July 1st in Florida, and that is creating a lot of controversy in the US. And that's related to what Amélie was just saying. It forbids any organization of 15 plus people to make anybody feel guilty about the misdemeanors of their ancestors, of anybody that were part of that community. So it's something that you might hear about and that is worth looking into. That being said, thank you so much for joining today, and we'll see you again next month.
So it's going to be on the 26th of August. And as Brigitte just mentioned on the chat, if you had any suggestions, any topic you would like us to address, please feel free to share.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a nice day.